Hi students, today we are going to talk about writing IMRD research paper and focusing on introduction. IMRD stands for Introduction, Method, Results, and Discussion. This is a very common style for writing up action projects and experiments. Of course, there are many different types of research papers, but for the purpose of this class, we are going to learn how to write IMRD research papers. As I explained in the previous slide, this type of research paper includes 4 sections. You can see that it starts from general. Okay, so introduction is kind of a reversed general to specific, method, result, and then in the discussion, we go from specific back to general, hoping to have general implications. Depending on the style of publication or depending on the requirement imposed by the journals or by the classes, sometimes there will be an abstract, which is a summary of the paper, and also a conclusion. The purpose of introduction is to basically introduce the readers so that they are given a perspective in order to understand what comes next in the body of your paper. When writing introduction, different textbooks suggest different terminologies. Some textbooks refer to them as parts. Some textbooks refer them as stages, and some textbooks refer them as moves. However, parts, stages, or moves generally refer to the same thing, where we break up the introduction into several parts, sections, stages, or moves. A lot of people argue that there are 5 parts in an introduction of a IMRD research paper, but once again, some people argue there are only 4 parts. 5 parts or 4 parts, the distinction is not very clear, but the order of writing should be quite similar. This is an example of introduction. I would like the student to stop the slide and spend a few minutes reading the different parts and then pay attention to the different colors. Okay, so students, please stop the slide now and spend a few minutes reading it before starting the slides again. Okay, students, I hope you have stopped and read the parts, and now let's move on to some questions. So what is the purpose of each of the 5 parts highlighted in introduction? Why do you think the parts are put in this order? And which part is the longest? Once again, students, I would like you to stop the slides and make sure that you could answer these questions before proceeding to the next page. So let's stop the slide and work on the questions. So the purpose of each part. Part one is really to give readers some general information about the field of research so that we make sure the readers are set so that they have a clear setting for the problem or the topic to be reported later. Okay. Part two is where we narrow it down to more specific information about the problem or topic already studied by other researchers. So this is a part where you have to include a lot of citations because you will want to persuade your readers, you want to show your readers that you are familiar with the field of research and that you have read enough about the field. So in part two, you will then include summaries of important related past studies or information, and then ideally include citations so that you show your readers that your statements are valid. The purpose of part three is to indicate a gap or a problem that needs to be investigated. So basically, you are preparing your readers so that you tell them why the research needs to be conducted because something is still missing. Then part four is your purpose, okay, the purpose of your study. And then part five is where you want to tell your reader that your research is important and that what your research might contribute to the field of study. Which part is the largest? Usually part two, or actually always part two, is the longest. How long should part one be? This really depends on how much you want to write. Also depends on how many words you are required to write your report or how many words you're required to write for the paper submission to the journal. So part one can be a few sentences or part one can be a few paragraphs or several paragraphs. You will usually begin part one with strong, firm, generally accepted statement about your topic area. So for example, if we put this in example of, an universe, okay, that is the general area. Then within a general area, you will identify your sub-area. So for example, the galaxy. And then you will then indicate your topic, which is the star. So by doing this, there is a very logical order of how information proceeds. Okay. When you write introduction, part one, or any parts, generally the rule of thumb is to avoid short sentences. Okay, because when you write short sentences, there is a very big possibility that these sentences are not developed enough. In other words, they do not include enough information. So when you have a very short sentence, please always ask yourself, is this sentence enough? Does it include enough information? Or can it be connected with the next sentence so that they can join together to make a longer sentence with development? Avoid using words such as you, like you know, you should, not use you. So you feels like we're talking. Okay, now I'm talking to you. That's why this is colloquial, this is talking. But in writing, we want to avoid using words such as you. Also, do not use words such as we, unless you are doing your research, unless you did your research with another student, because we always want to make sure what we write is specific. So we did an experiment on such and such. We would specifically refer to you and your research team member. Part 2 is the longest part of your introduction, and often we call this part review of literature. Okay, depending on the style of paper, sometimes writers would write an additional section in their paper called literature review. So depending on the style of paper, the paper could include introduction, literature review, method, results, and continues. Part 2 of your introduction is a collection of citations, okay, where they would reflect to the references that you put together in a list at the end of your report. If you do not know what is a citation, what is a reference, then please check with Google or a textbook. Okay, by this stage, all students should know the difference between citations and references. Part 2, which is review of literature, has 3 important purposes. One is it continues what you wrote in part 1, where you gave readers background information. So you provide readers with furthermore information of this topic. The another purpose is you would assure your readers that you are familiar with this field and that you are familiar with the important, well-known studies carried in this field. And the last purpose is that you want to establish your study as one part of the developing research with the purpose of researchers working together to enlarge the knowledge in your field, so that you as a researcher is contributing with other researchers to develop this research field. In part 2, okay, lastly, we're going to talk about parts 3, 4, and 5. So part 3 is where it directs readers' attention to the specific research problem topic that you'll be dealing with, and that you want to tell your readers that your topic hasn't been researched, but it's very important. Part 4 is where you announce the purpose of your research, and part 5, once again, is where you would indicate why your research is important and what kind of applications your results can give. So let's have a look the function of these sentences. So The first sentence is part 3. Although much work has been done to date, more studies need to be conducted to make sure that the effects of CAI in teaching. Okay, so I want students to stop the slide and think about these questions. Okay, what is the function of this sentence? How does the blue sentence relate to the previous sentence in red? What connection exists between the sentences? And finally, what is the author trying to suggest about the research in the purple sentence? So please stop the slide and work on these questions for a few minutes. Okay, lastly, we want to talk about tense usage. So one of the questions students often ask is, do they use present tense or past tense in their writing? Okay, there is no fixed rule, but usually the writers of introduction would use different tenses in different parts. For example, part 1 is often written in present tense because this is the general information of the field that is still reoccurring, so that even this year or next year or maybe 2 years later, this general information will not change. Therefore, part 1 is often but not always written in present tense. Part 2 is often written in past tense because this is a summary of the important related studies that were conducted. Part 4 is usually in past tense because this is where you state your purpose and what you did. And part 5 can be in present tense or past tense, where you argue the implications of your results. If you want to have strong arguments, then present tense. If you feel that your results are not so strong, then using past tense will probably cover yourself so that you will not be challenged by other readers. So this is the end of today's lecture notes on the writing of introduction for the IMRD paper. Thanks for listening, students.